The final tally is $18,000, my dad announced, sliding a crumpled piece of paper across the kitchen table. He said it with the same flat, informational tone he used to report that the lawn needed mowing, as if the number were a minor inconvenience rather than a financial cataclysm. For a full second, the figure just hung in the air between us, so absurd it felt like a badly translated joke. I was sure I had misheard him. "You mean 1800?" I said, my voice quiet, searching his face for the punchline. He just stared back, his expression unyielding. "No, Chloe. 18,000. Beside him, my sister Jessica let out an exaggerated, put-upon sigh, never once looking up from her phone. "God, don't be so dramatic," she muttered, her thumb swiping endlessly through a feed of glittering dresses. "It's for my prom. It's literally the most important night of my life." The sheer, casual entitlement of it sucked the air from my lungs. They weren't asking me. They were informing me of a balance due, a transaction where my only role was to provide the funds. In that moment, I wasn't a sister or a daughter. I was a living, breathing bank account. Before continuing the story, please subscribe. I need to reach 1,000 subscribers to be able to bring you stories like this every day. For you, it's just a click, but for me, it means a lot. The silence that followed their demand was a vacuum, and my mind rushed to fill it with a library of similar moments, a catalog of capitulations that all felt like dress rehearsals for this one. It wasn't a new feeling, it was a deep, familiar groove worn into my soul. 2 years ago, it had been my 10-year-old Honda Civic, my only way to get to the job that paid for so much of this family's life, which had started making a grinding, metallic groan whenever I shifted into third gear. The mechanic at the garage on Elm Street, a kind man with grease permanently etched into his laugh lines, had shown me the metal shavings in the transmission fluid and given me the grim prognosis: a full rebuild, $2,200, and I'd be lucky if it held out for another month. That same week, Jessica, on the cusp of her 16th birthday, had discovered the meaning of her existence was embodied in a black leather Saint Laurent satchel, a purse that cost $2,400 plus tax. I had the money saved, the exact amount for the transmission, tucked away in a separate account I'd proudly named Car Emergency. When I tried to explain the situation, showing my father the written estimate from the mechanic, he had waved it away like a pesky fly. "It's just a noise, Chloe," he'd said, his eyes already distant, calculating Jessica's happiness instead of my safety. "But her birthday, that's a milestone. All her friends have designer bags. Do you want her to be the only one who feels left out?" Jessica had, of course, played her part perfectly, her eyes welling with theatrical tears as she whispered about how she would be socially ruined without it. The argument was never about a car versus a handbag. It was about my tangible, practical need versus her ephemeral, emotional want. And in the merciless algebra of our family, Jessica's wants always had a higher value. I remember the hollow feeling in my chest as I transferred the money, watching my car emergency fund evaporate. The next day, Jessica paraded the purse around the house, taking dozens of selfies with it slung over her shoulder, while I drove to work with the radio turned up to full volume, trying to drown out the ever-loudening groan from the gut of my car. For 3 more months, I nursed that vehicle along, my stomach clenching with every gear shift, praying I wouldn't get stranded on the side of the highway. The noise was a constant physical reminder of my place, a grinding soundtrack to my own invisibility. And now, sitting at the same table, staring at the number $18,000, I realized nothing had changed at all, except the audacity of the price tag on my sister's happiness. "Let's be logical about this, Chloe," my dad said, his voice taking on the patient, condescending tone he used when he felt he was explaining something obvious to a child. He flattened the crumpled paper on the table, turning it into an exhibit. "It's not just one thing. It's an entire experience, a memory she'll have for the rest of her life. You have to invest in memories." Jessica leaned forward, her earlier indifference replaced by a righteous passion, ready to defend her vision. "Okay, so, the dress," she began, her voice gaining speed and excitement. "It's a custom Marchesa Notte. We had a consultation. It's being fitted next week. That's $7,000, but it includes the alterations." I opened my mouth to protest, $7,000 for a dress she would wear for 6 hours. But my dad held up a hand. "Let her finish," he commanded. "Then," Jessica continued, "there's the photographer. He's not a prom photographer, he's like a fashion photographer. His name is Julian, and he did a shoot for a magazine. He's doing a whole session before, at the Botanical Gardens, and then candids at the event. That's 3,000. I tried to inject a sliver of reality. "Jess, my wedding photographer cost less than that." She rolled her eyes so hard I thought she might sprain them. "Chloe, this is about aesthetics. It's for the story." My dad nodded gravely. "Then there's transportation. A luxury party bus for her and her 19 closest friends, so everyone can be together and be safe. That's 4,000 for the night. And we've arranged for a pre-prom brunch to be catered here at the house, which is another 2,000. The final 2 is for the after-prom weekend. They've all rented a beach house in Malibu until Sunday morning." My head was spinning. It was a waterfall of ludicrous expenses, each one more disconnected from reality than the last. "This is insane," I finally managed to say, the words feeling small and inadequate. "We can give Jessica an amazing, beautiful prom for a fraction of this. A gorgeous dress from a real store, a limo, a nice dinner. This is a caricature." That's when the mood shifted from justification to accusation. "It's only a caricature to you because you can't imagine it," my dad said, his voice turning cold. "You see the cost, not the value." Jessica's lower lip began to tremble, her ultimate weapon. "You're just jealous," she whispered, the words hitting me with the force of a physical slap. "You never had anything like this, so you don't want me to have it. You always do this. You try to make me feel small for wanting nice things." It was a masterful, devastating pivot. My genuine concern about financial sanity was twisted into a petty personal failing. In their eyes, I wasn't being responsible. I was being cruel. I wasn't a sister trying to help. I was a bitter spinster trying to ruin her beautiful, popular sister's one perfect night. And just like that, the discussion was over. My opinion wasn't just dismissed. It was diagnosed as a symptom of my own sad, joyless life. The next morning, stepping through the glass doors of Sterling Analytics felt like passing through an atmospheric membrane, leaving the toxic, emotionally charged chaos of my home for a world of cool, clean logic. Here, I wasn't Chloe the family ATM, the jealous sister, the ungrateful daughter. I was Chloe Vance, senior data analyst, and here, my worth was quantifiable, provable, and respected. My cubicle was an altar to order. 3 monitors hummed in a gentle arc, a command center from which I navigated terabytes of raw, untamed information. On one screen, a river of code I'd written scrolled past, a Python script designed to clean and structure chaotic server data from our biggest client, a massive logistics firm. On another, a complex regression model was running, its progress bar a tiny sliver of green creeping slowly forward. My current project, the Northwind account, was a beast. We were trying to build a predictive model to identify supply chain vulnerabilities before they happened, a project worth millions to the client and to us. While at home I was treated as if I couldn't budget for a simple social event, here I was trusted to build the very tools that would protect a global company's bottom line. The air was filled with the quiet, focused energy of people solving complex problems. Around noon, a junior analyst named Ben appeared at my elbow, looking defeated. "Chloe, I'm sorry to bother you," he said, pointing to a data visualization on his tablet that was clearly skewed. "The model keeps overweighting seasonal outliers, and my projections for Q4 are a mess." I looked at his methodology, instantly spotting the flaw in his data normalization process. Instead of just telling him the answer, I walked him through the logic, explaining how to apply a weighted moving average to smooth the peaks without losing the integrity of the underlying trend. He listened intently, his expression clearing from confusion to dawning comprehension. "Oh," he said, a wave of relief washing over his face. "Of course. That makes perfect sense. Thanks, Chloe. You saved me." It was a small thing, a simple 5-minute exchange, but it was a currency of respect I could never earn at home. Later that afternoon, my boss, Mr. Harrison, a sharp, no-nonsense man in his late 50s, stopped by my desk. He didn't say hello. He just leaned over, his eyes scanning the intricate model on my center screen. He was silent for a full minute, and I felt the familiar, pleasant pressure of being scrutinized by someone whose opinion mattered. "That's the variable," he said finally, his voice a low rumble of approval as he pointed to a cluster of data points I had isolated. "The fleet maintenance delays in the Singapore hub. That's the key we've been missing. That's what's been creating the phantom bottleneck. Good work, Vance." He straightened up and walked away without another word. It was all the validation I needed. A man who managed a multi-million-dollar department could see my value in a single glance at a complex data model, yet my own father, who claimed to love me, couldn't see it at all. That evening, armed with the quiet confidence I had absorbed from my day at work, I decided to make one last stand. I found my father in the den, poring over the sports section, the television murmuring in the background. Jessica was nowhere in sight, which I hoped would give me a fighting chance at a rational conversation. I sat down on the ottoman opposite his armchair, my hands clasped tightly in my lap. "Dad," I began, my voice steady and calm, "I have thought about this all day, and I cannot, in good conscience, spend $18,000 on a party. It's not about being jealous, and it's not about punishing Jessica. It's about basic financial responsibility. I am willing to contribute $3,000. That is a generous, significant amount of money for a prom." I had practiced the words, made them sound reasonable and firm, like a project proposal at the office. For a moment, he just looked at me over the top of his newspaper, his eyes narrowed. Then he slowly, deliberately folded the paper and placed it on the side table. The quiet, methodical action felt more menacing than shouting. "Responsibility?" he said, the word dripping with disdain. "You want to talk to me about responsibility? Let me tell you about the responsibility of raising a child. Do you have any idea what I sacrificed for you?" He leaned forward, his voice dropping to a low, intense register that he reserved for maximum emotional damage. "Who do you think paid for the braces that straightened your teeth? Who drove you to every single one of your nerdy math club competitions for 5 years, sitting in those uncomfortable bleachers for hours? I worked 60-hour weeks, Chloe. I took double shifts at the plant so you could have a roof over your head and food on the table so you could go to that state college you were so set on." Every word was a meticulously chosen guilt trip, designed to paint me as an ungrateful wretch. These were not memories of parental love, they were debts he was calling in. "I am grateful for all of that," I said, my voice starting to waver despite my resolve. "But that was your job as a parent. This is different. This is an extravagance." A cruel smile touched his lips. "Is it? It seems to me that you've forgotten whose house you're living in." The temperature in the room dropped 10 degrees. I knew what was coming. "You pay rent on a room, Chloe," he said, the words cold and hard as stones. "That's a tenant arrangement. It doesn't give you the right to disrespect the way I run my family or how I choose to support your sister's happiness. If you're not going to be a contributing member of this family in the way that we need you to be, then you don't have to be a member of this household at all." He let the threat hang in the air, a guillotine suspended above my head. "The bank transfer for the $18,000 needs to be completed by Friday. If it's not, I expect you to have your things packed and be out by the end of the weekend. Your choice." It wasn't a discussion. It was an ultimatum. My role in this family had just been explicitly defined. I was a source of funding, and my residency was conditional upon my compliance. His cold, calculated words, "Be out by the end of the weekend," acted like a key, unlocking a memory I had long since buried under a thick layer of scar tissue. The scene materialized in my mind with a clarity that was nauseating. It was my college graduation, 4 years earlier. I was standing on the lawn outside the auditorium, the heavy, humid air of a May afternoon pressing in on me. I was wearing a black gown and a cap that kept slipping, and in my hand, I clutched the leather-bound folder containing my diploma, a Bachelor of Science in Statistics, earned summa cum laude. I was the first person in our family to ever graduate from a 4-year university, a fact I had naively believed would be a source of immense pride for them. I felt a surge of accomplishment so pure it was almost buoyant, a feeling that I was finally, irrefutably, worth something. My parents were there, and my dad had his arm around my shoulders, a stiff, unpracticed gesture. He was just starting to tell a colleague he'd run into about my degree when a car screeched into a nearby parking spot. Jessica, then 17, burst out, her face a mess of smeared mascara and hysterical tears. She ran toward us, not with a celebratory bouquet, but with the full force of a Category 5 teenage drama. "He broke up with me," she wailed, collapsing into my father's other arm. "Trevor broke up with me. By text." And just like that, the entire gravitational field of our family shifted. My father's attention snapped from me to her with an audible click. His face, moments before a mask of mild public pride, contorted into a mask of deep, genuine concern. My graduation, the culmination of 4 years of brutal all-nighters, complex mathematical proofs, and sacrificing any semblance of a social life, vanished. It simply ceased to exist. The 20 minutes we had before we needed to head to the restaurant for my celebratory dinner were consumed by a frantic, whispered inquest into what Trevor had done, why he had done it, and what Jessica was going to post on social media in retaliation. I stood there, holding my diploma, a physical testament to the hardest thing I had ever accomplished, while my father cooed at Jessica, promising to take her for ice cream and that Trevor was a loser who didn't deserve her anyway. When I tried to gently steer the conversation back, saying, "Dad, we should probably go if we want to make our reservation," he looked at me as if I were a stranger who had just interrupted a private family matter. "Chloe, for God's sake, look at your sister," he'd snapped. "She's heartbroken. We'll eat later." We never did make it to the restaurant. We got takeout burgers and ate them in the living room, while Jessica scrolled through Trevor's Instagram, providing a tearful running commentary. My diploma lay on the coffee table, an expensive, unremarked-upon coaster. The eviction threat wasn't new. It was just the logical endpoint of a lifetime of being told that my concrete achievements were worth less than my sister's fleeting feelings. My hard work was a resource. Her drama was an emergency. And in our family, the emergency always came first. The Friday deadline loomed over me like a black cloud, poisoning even the sterile, logical sanctuary of my office. The eviction threat was no longer a hypothetical. It was a ticking clock, and every hour that passed made it more real. I found myself staring at a complex predictive model on my screen, the elegant lines of code I'd written blurring into an incomprehensible scrawl. My mind wasn't on standard deviations or data normalization. It was replaying my father's cold, dismissive words on an endless loop. The quiet hum of the servers, usually a comforting sound, now felt like a low-grade mockery of the chaos raging in my head. I was so lost in the cacophony of my own thoughts that I flinched when an instant message popped up on my screen. It was from Mr. Harrison. "My office. Now." There was no preamble, no pleas. My stomach sank. He had noticed. He had seen my distraction, my lack of focus, and now I was going to be reprimanded for it. The thought of losing the one part of my life where I felt competent was almost more than I could bear. I walked the short distance to his glass-walled corner office, on legs that felt like they were filled with sand. He was standing, looking out the large window at the city below, but turned as I entered. "Close the door, Vance," he said, gesturing to a chair. I sat, my hands gripping my knees to keep them from shaking. He sat opposite me, leaning forward with his elbows on his desk. "You look exhausted," he stated, not unkindly. "The Northwind project getting to you?" I managed a weak nod, unable to form words. "Good," he said, and the unexpectedness of the word caught me off guard. He swiveled his monitor toward me. On the screen was the final executive summary I had submitted the day before, a series of graphs and projections showing the supply chain vulnerabilities we had successfully identified. "I just got off a call with the client's executive team," he continued, his voice low and serious. "They're calling your predictive model revolutionary. They've already used it to reroute a major shipment and avoid a port strike in Asia that would have cost them $8 million. He pointed to a specific graph, one I had spent 3 sleepless nights perfecting. "This, right here, the way you isolated the correlation between weather patterns and labor union activity. It's not just good data science, Vance. It's insightful. It's damn near art." He leaned back, his eyes locking onto mine. "I've been in this business for 30 years. I know talent when I see it. You have a level of dedication and an intuitive grasp of complex systems that is exceptionally rare. Work like this. It changes things. For the client, and for us." He let the words settle in the quiet office. In that moment, the threat of eviction, the screaming injustice of the $18,000, it all faded into the background, replaced by the warm, shocking glow of genuine recognition. It was a language I was so starved for that it felt like a foreign tongue. He wasn't praising a subordinate, he was acknowledging a peer. And in that quiet, sunlit office, I felt a piece of my own fractured self-worth click back into place. The glow from Mr. Harrison's praise was a fragile shield, but it shattered the moment I walked through the front door of my house. The air inside was thick with a tense, expectant silence. My father was in the living room, not reading or watching TV, just sitting in his armchair, waiting. He looked up as I entered, his face a hard, unreadable mask. The clock on the mantelpiece seemed to tick louder than usual, each second a hammer blow against my resolve. I had spent the entire drive home weighing my options, but it was a pointless exercise. I had no other options, not yet. I had savings, but not enough to cover a security deposit, first and last month's rent on a new apartment, and the cost of moving, all while my next paycheck was still 2 weeks away. The logistics were a prison. My father had me cornered, and he knew it. The brief, brilliant moment of feeling valued and seen in my boss's office was just that, a moment. It couldn't put a roof over my head tonight. I walked into the room and stood before him, feeling less like a daughter and more like a defendant awaiting sentencing. The fight was gone, the arguments were pointless, the emotional appeals were useless. All that was left was the cold, brutal reality of the power he held over me. "Fine," I said. The word came out as a hollow croak, devoid of any emotion. "You win. I'll transfer the money." My father's expression didn't soften with gratitude or relief. Instead, a flicker of smug triumph lit his eyes. He had won the war of wills. "I knew you'd come to your senses," he said, leaning back in his chair, the victor. "It's the right thing to do for your sister, for the family." But as I turned and walked away from him, up the stairs to my room, a strange and profound calm settled over me. It wasn't the calm of surrender. It was the calm of a decision made. The emotional exhaustion that had been weighing me down for days evaporated, replaced by a chilling, crystalline clarity. He thought he had won. They both did. They thought this was just another transaction in a long history of them. They were wrong. This wasn't a payment for a prom dress or a party bus. This was a severance package. This was the fee I was paying to terminate my emotional contract with this family. The $18,000 was the price of my freedom. In my head, a switch had been flipped. The goal was no longer to make them see my worth. Mr. Harrison had already shown me that my worth was self-evident to anyone with eyes to see. The new goal was to escape. This wasn't a defeat. It was the last, most painful investment I would ever make in them, and the first, most crucial investment I would ever make in myself. As I closed my bedroom door, the quiet click of the latch felt like the locking of a vault. Inside, a plan was beginning to form, cold and precise as the lines of code I wrote every day. This was the last time. It was a silent, unbreakable vow made not in anger, but in the absolute certainty of a future they would have no part in. I sat on the edge of my bed, my laptop warm on my knees, the screen glowing with the sterile blue and white of my online banking portal. The cursor blinked rhythmically over the confirm transfer button, a tiny pulsing heartbeat counting down the end of a dream. There were two numbers on the screen that mattered. One was the balance of my high-yield savings account, $21,347.58. The other was the amount in the transfer field, $18,000. For 3 years, I had funneled every spare dollar into that account. Every overtime shift, every freelance data cleaning project I took on the side, every time I packed a lunch instead of buying one, it all went in there. I had a name for it in my personal budget spreadsheet, the escape fund. It was the seed money for a down payment on a small, one-bedroom condo on the other side of town, a place with a door that I could lock, where my value wasn't contingent on my utility. I had a real estate app on my phone and a saved search for places under $200,000. It was my secret, tangible hope for a life that was truly my own. I took a deep breath and clicked the button. The screen refreshed, a small green checkmark appearing with the words, "Transfer successful." And just like that, 3 years of discipline and sacrifice were gone in a single, silent digital transaction. My savings account balance now read $3,347.58. I felt a wave of physical nausea, a hollow, scraping sensation in the pit of my stomach. Downstairs, I heard a shriek of pure, unadulterated joy from Jessica. I closed my laptop and walked woodenly out of my room. She was in the living room, phone pressed to her ear, practically bouncing off the walls. "It's a go!" she screamed into the phone. "The deposit for the Malibu house just went through. Yes, the one with the infinity pool." My father was standing by the fireplace, a broad, satisfied smile on his face. He caught my eye and gave me a curt nod, a gesture one might give to a service worker who has completed their task efficiently. There was no thank you. There was no acknowledgement of the monumental sacrifice I had just made. My grief, my sense of loss, was completely invisible to them. It didn't exist in their world. All that existed was the giddy, triumphant reality of Jessica's perfect prom weekend. "Chloe, can you believe it?" Jessica said, finally noticing me standing there. She lowered her phone for a second, her eyes shining with a manic excitement. "Julian, the photographer. He just confirmed he can bring a drone for aerial shots at the beach house. How amazing is that?" I just stared at her, my face a blank mask. I couldn't find a single word to say. The cost of her drone shots was the security deposit on my future. The price of her infinity pool was the walls of my own home. They weren't just spending my money, they were spending my life, and they were celebrating as they did it. In the week leading up to the prom, our house transformed into a command center for Operation Jessica's Perfect Night, and my role was officially demoted from reluctant financier to silent, invisible stagehand. The deliveries were a constant, daily assault. A courier service delivered a massive garment bag from the couture boutique, and Jessica insisted on unveiling the dress for me. She unzipped the bag with the reverence of a priest, unveiling a holy relic. It was an explosion of tulle and hand-stitched sequins, undeniably beautiful and astronomically expensive. She held it up against herself, preening in front of the hallway mirror. "Can you believe it?" she breathed, her eyes wide with self-admiration. "It's like it was literally made for me." She didn't ask if I liked it. She didn't acknowledge that my dream of a home was hanging on that velvet hanger. She simply expected me to be a mirror, reflecting her own adoration back at her. Every conversation was a monologue of her plans, a fire hose of trivial details that were, in her world, matters of grave importance. I would be trying to eat my toast in the morning, and she would sit opposite me, scrolling through her phone, providing a running commentary. "Okay, so the caterer for the brunch says we can do either a mimosa bar or a Bellini bar. Which do you think sounds more chic?" "I'm leaning Bellini." She'd look at me, but the question was rhetorical. She wasn't seeking my input. She was thinking aloud, using me as a sounding board, a human notebook. "And Ashley's mom is trying to say her daughter's party bus has a better sound system, but I know for a fact ours has the subwoofers. I made them send me the specs." The cruelty wasn't in any single overt action. It was in the relentless, crushing obliviousness of it all. It was in the way she would talk about spending thousands of dollars on floral arrangements while I was mentally calculating if my depleted bank account could survive a necessary oil change for my car. She treated me not with malice, but with an indifference so profound it was arguably worse. I was a resource that had been successfully tapped, a problem that had been solved. Now that my function had been served, I was simply part of the furniture, a silent witness to the grand spectacle I had been forced to fund. The worst part was when she modeled the custom-made jewelry, a delicate diamond necklace and matching earrings that had cost $2,000. "It's so classic, right?" she said, turning her head from side to side, making the diamonds catch the light. "It'll look so good with my updo." She paused, catching my eye in the mirror. For a fleeting second, I thought she might say thank you. Instead, she said, "You should really do something with your hair. You always just wear it in that bun. It's so severe." And then she turned back to her own glittering reflection, leaving me standing in her wake, feeling not just poor, but plain and utterly, hopelessly invisible. That night, long after the arias of Jessica's planning had ceased and the house had finally fallen silent, I retreated to the sanctuary of my room. The door clicked shut behind me, a soft, definitive sound that separated my world from theirs. I didn't turn on the main light, preferring the focused glow of my desk lamp, which cast a small, intimate circle of illumination in the darkness. I opened my laptop again, the familiar blue and white of the banking portal filling the screen. I stared at the number, 3,347.58. It was no longer a source of searing pain or nausea. The emotional storm had passed, and in its wake was a profound and unsettling calm. The number was just data now, a single, critical variable in a new equation I was building. It was the starting point. My dream of a condo in this city was dead, collateral damage in a war I had been destined to lose from the start. But staring at that depleted balance, I realized the dream itself wasn't the point. The location was incidental. The true dream was the escape, the independence, and that was still possible. I minimized the banking tab and opened a new one. In the search bar, my fingers moved with a cool, detached precision, typing a city name I had only ever thought of in the abstract: Seattle. It was where Sterling Analytics had its corporate headquarters. It was a place I had no history with, a place where no one knew me as the family ATM. It was a blank slate. I began my research not with anger or a sense of frantic desperation, but with the same methodical focus I brought to the Northwind project. I created a new spreadsheet, my comfort zone, and named it Operation Relocation. I built columns for cost of living, average rent for a one-bedroom apartment, public transportation options, and neighborhood safety ratings. I systematically worked my way through apartment rental websites, creating a list of potential neighborhoods: Capitol Hill, Ballard, Fremont. I wasn't just fantasizing, I was collecting data, building a model for a new life. I looked up the internal job board for my company, screening for potential openings at the Seattle HQ. I analyzed the required skills, cross-referencing them with my own resume, identifying potential lateral moves or even junior promotions that would give me a legitimate reason to request a transfer. There were no tears. There was no rage. Lashing out felt like a waste of energy, a performance for an audience that wouldn't understand or care. Every keystroke was a quiet act of rebellion. Every line added to my spreadsheet was a brick in the foundation of my new life. They thought they had taken everything from me, but they had only taken money. In the quiet solitude of my room, surrounded by the glow of my monitor, I realized they had inadvertently given me something far more valuable in return: the absolute, unshakable certainty that my future did not include them. The day of the prom dawned not with a sense of dread, but with a strange, clinical detachment. I felt like an anthropologist observing the elaborate, nonsensical rituals of a foreign tribe. The house, usually quiet on a Saturday morning, was buzzing with a high-frequency energy that radiated from Jessica's bedroom. A hairstylist and a makeup artist had set up a professional-looking station in her room, their various tools and palettes covering every available surface. The air was thick with the chemical scent of hairspray and the sweet, cloying smell of expensive perfume. My father, acting as a flustered but proud event manager, barked orders and fussed over trivialities. "Chloe, the caterers are here for the brunch. Show them where to set up the chafing dishes," he called out as I was trying to make my own coffee. "Chloe, Jessica needs her pearl earrings from the safety deposit box. The key is in my desk." I moved through the chaos with a placid, almost unnerving calm. I did as I was asked, my movements efficient and robotic. I was no longer a participant in the family drama. I was a ghost in the machine, a silent, functional cog in the grand production of Jessica's happiness. I watched as her friends arrived, a flock of brightly colored, chattering birds, their laughter echoing through the house. They oohed and awed over the catered brunch, the mimosa bar, and the sheer spectacle of it all. I stood in the corner of the kitchen, sipping my coffee, an invisible benefactor. Several of Jessica's friends, girls I had known since they were children, looked straight through me as if I were a piece of furniture. To them, I was just Jessica's quiet, older sister, a background character in the main event. The photographer, Julian, arrived with an assistant and an intimidating amount of camera equipment. He was exactly as Jessica had described him: young, dressed in all black, and radiating an air of artistic importance. He immediately began directing everyone, arranging Jessica and her friends in carefully curated poses in the backyard, turning our mundane suburban lawn into a high-fashion set. My father hovered behind him, beaming with a vicarious pride, his phone held aloft to capture his own blurry, inferior images of the moment. I was asked to steam a microscopic wrinkle out of Jessica's dress, to fetch her a glass of water with a specific type of straw so as not to smudge her lipstick, to find the lint roller. Each request was made without a please, each completed task received without a thank you. I was staff. The caterers, the makeup artist, the photographer. I was one of them. The hired help. And in a strange way, it was liberating. Their casual dismissal of me as a person solidified my resolve. They weren't just overlooking me, they were fundamentally incapable of seeing me. As I watched Jessica, a shimmering, sequined princess in the center of her universe, I felt nothing. Not jealousy, not anger, not even a lingering sense of loss. All I felt was the quiet, steady hum of the countdown clock in my mind, ticking off the final hours of my servitude. The grand finale of the pre-prom photo shoot was taking place in the living room, which Julian, the photographer, had effectively commandeered as his personal studio. Jessica was the sun around which every other body in the room orbited. She stood near the large bay window, her 19 friends arranged around her in a meticulously crafted tableau of youthful glamour. The air was a thick soup of noise, the rapid, percussive clicking of Julian's professional camera, the near-constant flash from a dozen iPhones held by the other parents who had arrived, and a high-pitched, effervescent river of chatter. "Yes, Jessica. Chin down just a touch. Gorgeous," Julian commanded, circling his subject. "Okay, girls, big, fun, spontaneous laugh. Now!" My father was at the very forefront of the parental paparazzi, his face flushed with a pride so intense it looked like a medical condition. He was providing a running commentary to the mother of one of Jessica's friends. "That's my girl," he said, his voice thick with emotion. "She was born for this kind of thing. A star." I was standing near the archway to the dining room, my purpose in the scene having been fulfilled, now just an inconvenient piece of set dressing. I was observing it all through a strange, invisible filter, watching the performance of a life I was no longer a part of. And then, cutting through the chaotic symphony of clicks and laughter, a sound pierced the air. It was sharp, digital, and ruthlessly professional, the default marimba ringtone of my phone. The sound was so alien in the context of the fluffy, celebratory atmosphere that it acted like a kill switch. The chatter died instantly. Julian lowered his camera, his brow furrowed in annoyance. Every head in the room, a sea of over-styled hair and fascinated eyes, swiveled in my direction. The collective gaze felt like a physical weight, pinning me to the spot. The spotlight had swung from Jessica, the star, to me, the saboteur. "Chloe, for God's sake!" my father hissed, his voice a furious whip-crack of sound that lashed across the silent room. The pride on his face had curdled into pure, unadulterated rage. "Are you serious right now? Turn that thing off. You're ruining the shot." His public admonishment was designed for maximum humiliation, a clear message to all the witnesses present. She doesn't matter. Her disruptions are an embarrassment. Feeling the burn of 20 pairs of eyes on me, I slowly pulled the phone from my pocket. My hands were surprisingly steady. The shame he expected me to feel simply wasn't there. As I moved my thumb to silence the call, my eyes registered the name glowing on the screen. It was 2 words that felt like they belonged to a different universe, a universe of logic, competence, and respect. The caller ID read, "Mr. Harrison." Ignoring my father's furious hiss, I swiped to answer and lifted the phone to my ear. It was a simple act of defiance, but it felt like pulling a pin from a grenade. I didn't say a word, just listened. My own calm, a stark contrast to the apoplectic rage radiating from my father. Into the tense, suffocating silence of the living room, Mr. Harrison's voice erupted from the phone's earpiece, a booming baritone so full of energy and excitement that it was clearly audible to everyone within a 10-foot radius. "Vance, thank God you picked up," he bellowed, foregoing any professional pleasantries. "I know it's Saturday. I'm sorry, but this couldn't wait for Monday. I just got out of an emergency teleconference with the entire executive board at Northwind." A nervous murmur rippled through the assembled parents. My father took a half-step forward, his face a thunderous mask of confusion and anger. He couldn't comprehend what was happening, why this call was more important than his daughter's photo shoot. "They're not just happy, Chloe, they're stunned," Mr. Harrison continued, his voice crackling with an energy I had never heard from him before. "Your predictive model, the one you built? They're calling it a paradigm-shifting strategic asset. Turns out they used it again yesterday, on a hunch, to analyze a potential customs bottleneck in Rotterdam. Your model flagged a 92% probability of a 3-day delay. They rerouted their entire European fleet based on your data. The delay happened this morning, just as you predicted. Every one of their competitors is now stuck in that port." I could feel the atmosphere in the room changing. The annoyance was being replaced by a dawning, unwilling respect from the onlookers. They were hearing words like, European fleet, and strategic asset. This was not a call about a late report. Jessica, still frozen in her pose by the window, was no longer the center of attention. All eyes were on me. "They are projecting," Mr. Harrison's voice boomed, reaching a crescendo, "that your work will save them over $100 million in the first year alone. 100 million! The number dropped into the room like a physical object, a meteor that vaporized everything else. The $18,000 that had been the source of so much pain and conflict suddenly seemed laughably, pathetically small. "And because of that," my boss roared, "they just signed, not an extension, Vance, an exclusive 5-year, multi-million-dollar partnership. We're building an entire new division at Sterling Analytics dedicated to predictive logistics, and it's all going to be built on the foundation of the work you did." My father's jaw had gone slack. His face, once red with rage, had paled to a sickly, grayish white. He was staring at me, but for the first time, he wasn't seeing his disobedient, ungrateful daughter. He was seeing a stranger, a woman who commanded million-dollar consequences, and the recognition in his eyes was mingled with the unmistakable, gut-wrenching horror of a man who has just realized he has made a catastrophic miscalculation. The silence in the room stretched thin, brittle, and was filled only by the sound of Mr. Harrison's voice, a force of nature that was actively reshaping my entire world. "So here's the offer, Vance," he continued, his tone shifting from celebratory to businesslike, yet still loud enough for everyone to hear. "We're not posting this position. It's yours. We want you to be the director of the new predictive analytics division. This isn't a promotion, it's a creation. You'll be building your own team, from the ground up." The collective gasp from the parents was audible. The title itself, director, was a bomb. It landed with a concussive force, and I could feel the shockwave ripple through the audience. "Obviously, this position is based here at corporate headquarters in Seattle," he said, and I felt a jolt, a dizzying sense of cosmic alignment. My secret spreadsheet, my quiet plan, was suddenly being offered to me on a silver platter. "We know it's a big move, so the offer comes with a full, comprehensive relocation package, movers, logistics, everything handled. We'll also provide you with corporate housing for the first 3 months to give you time to find a permanent place." Then he delivered the final, devastating blow. "The starting salary is $220,000, plus a $25,000 signing bonus to help with any immediate expenses." The number hung in the air, a figure of such impossible magnitude that it seemed to bend the reality of the room around it. $220,000, more than 4 times what my father earned at the peak of his career. My own hand holding the phone was rock steady. I looked out at the frozen tableau before me. "Mr. Harrison," I said, my voice clear and even, imbued with a professional calm I didn't know I possessed. "That is an extraordinary offer. I appreciate you calling me directly. Can you send me the formal details via email?" The power dynamic in the room didn't just shift, it underwent a tectonic plate reversal. My father was no longer the patriarch, the landlord, the man in charge. He was a statue of ash, his face a horrifying collage of shock, regret, and the dawning, soul-crushing realization of his own catastrophic misjudgment. He had threatened to evict a woman who could now likely buy the entire house in cash. He had extorted $18,000, a sum I now knew was less than my signing bonus, from his greatest financial asset, and in doing so, had guaranteed he would never see another cent. Jessica was even more pathetic. The light had gone out of her eyes. Her perfect dress, her perfect hair, her perfect day, all of it had been rendered meaningless, a childish and garishly expensive footnote in the story of my life-altering success. Her friends, the flock of adoring acolytes, were no longer looking at her. They were staring at me, their expressions a mixture of awe, envy, and dawning respect. In the space of a 90-second phone call, I had gone from being the weird, invisible, loser older sister to the most powerful and interesting person in the room. "I will, Vance. Congratulations. You've earned this," Mr. Harrison said, and with a final, "We'll be in touch," the line went dead. I lowered the phone, the silence it left behind a profound humming vacuum. I didn't rush to fill it. I let it hang there, letting the full weight of what had just happened settle over the room, letting my father and sister suffocate in it. Every eye was still locked on me, waiting. They were waiting for a reaction, for me to gloat or cry or scream. I did none of those things. I simply slipped the phone back into my pocket, my movements deliberate and serene. I let my gaze sweep across the room, over the stunned faces of Jessica's friends and their parents, over Jessica herself, who looked like a beautiful, fragile doll that had just been dropped on a marble floor. Finally, I looked at my father. I met his wide, panicked eyes directly. For the first time in my life, I wasn't looking at him from a position of supplication or fear. I was looking at him from a place of unassailable strength, and the view was breathtaking. "I'm accepting the offer," I announced, my voice not loud, but carrying to every corner of the silent room with absolute authority. "I'll be moving to Seattle. My new position starts in 2 weeks, so I'll be out of the house by Friday." Each sentence was a clean, precise cut, severing the final threads of my old life. There was no room for negotiation. I wasn't asking for permission. I was stating a fact. The finality of it was absolute. My father opened his mouth, a strangled, gurgling sound coming from his throat. He looked like a man who had just watched his winning lottery ticket get swept away by the wind. "Chloe, wait. We should talk about this," he stammered, his voice weak and pleading. It was the voice of a man who had just lost all of his leverage and knew it. I gave a small, almost imperceptible shake of my head. "There's nothing to talk about," I said, my voice devoid of malice or anger. It was as calm and factual as if I were reporting on last quarter's earnings. I held his gaze, and for the final killing blow, I offered him a single devastating piece of grace. "Consider the $18,000 a parting gift," I said, the words dropping like stones into the dead silence. "A final contribution to the family, but I want to be very clear, so there are no misunderstandings later." I paused, letting the weight of my next words gather force. "Don't ever ask me for anything again." And with that, I turned my back on him, on all of them, and walked out of the room, leaving behind the wreckage of a world I had just single-handedly destroyed and a future I was about to build from scratch. The luxury party bus, a gleaming black behemoth that had cost $4,000 for the night, eventually pulled away from the curb. I watched from my bedroom window as it disappeared down the street, its gaudy interior lights flashing pink and blue. From the outside, the scene probably looked exactly as planned. A group of beautifully dressed teenagers heading off to the biggest night of their young lives. But I knew the atmosphere inside that bus, and in the house left behind, was irrevocably poisoned. The foundation of Jessica's triumph, built on the quicksand of her perceived supremacy, had been liquefied. Her perfect night was now just a contractual obligation she had to see through, a hollow, expensive charade. Her currency, the unquestioned adoration of her family and the envy of her peers, had just been declared worthless on the open market. The friends surrounding her were no longer just celebrating her. They were now processing the fact that the quiet girl they'd ignored for years was about to become a powerful, wealthy executive in a major city. The whispers on that bus wouldn't be about Jessica's dress. They would be about my salary. I didn't need to be there to know. I could feel the reverberations of the power shift even from my room, where I was methodically folding sweaters and placing them into a cardboard box. Downstairs, the party was over. The remaining parents offered my father awkward, pitying condolences as if there had been a death in the family, and in a way, there had been. They left quickly, eager to escape the thick, suffocating atmosphere of failure. I heard the front door close for the last time, and then a silence descended that was heavier and more profound than any I had ever known in this house. For the next several hours, the only sound was the rustle of my own packing. I imagined my father sitting in his armchair in the den, the television off, the sports section unread. He would be staring into the middle distance, the numbers from Mr. Harrison's call echoing in his head. Director, Seattle, $220,000. He was a man who understood money, who used it as a tool for control and a measure of worth. He would be doing the brutal math, calculating the scale of his blunder. He hadn't just lost a daughter, he had fumbled a winning lottery ticket. He had invested his entire emotional and financial portfolio in the wrong asset, and the market had just issued a devastating correction. Jessica returned shortly after midnight. There was no giddy, triumphant entrance. I heard her key in the lock, the soft click of the door, and then quiet, defeated footsteps on the stairs. She didn't burst into her room with stories and laughter. She moved like a ghost. Her triumph had been a public humiliation. Every compliment on her dress, every dance, every moment would have been tainted by the spectacular public revelation of her own cosmic insignificance in the face of my success. The $18,000, once a symbol of her infinite worth, was now a monument to her family's spectacular error in judgment. My departure was not an emotional event. It was a logistical operation. For the next 5 days, I moved with the quiet, methodical purpose of a soldier breaking down a camp. There were no dramatic confrontations, no tearful goodbyes. My father and Jessica treated me with a wide, fearful berth, moving around me like I was a piece of unexploded ordnance. They spoke to me only when necessary, in quiet, timid tones, and I responded with a calm, professional politeness that was more devastating than any rage could have been. Each item I packed was an act of curation, a decision about what part of my past, if any, was worthy of bringing into my future. My textbooks on advanced statistics and data modeling went in first, the solid, heavy foundation of my new life. My few cherished possessions, a small collection of antique maps, a framed photo of my late grandmother, who had always encouraged my love of numbers, the worn copy of a favorite novel, were wrapped carefully and placed in a box labeled Essentials. Everything else was subjected to a ruthless triage. The clothes that reminded me of a life of making myself smaller, the trinkets and gifts given with obligation rather than love, the books I would never read again, they all went into large black trash bags. The act was not sentimental. It was cleansing. Each bag I carried out to the curb felt like shedding a layer of dead skin, making myself lighter for the journey ahead. The professional movers, arranged and paid for by Sterling Analytics, arrived on Friday morning. They were 2 strong, efficient men who called me ma'am and worked with a swift, impersonal grace. They wrapped my furniture in blankets and systematically emptied my room in under an hour. My father stood in the doorway of the den, watching them, his face a gray, sagging mask of impotence. He was a king watching his single, most valuable territory being peacefully and legally annexed by a foreign power. He looked like he wanted to say something, to protest, but he had no grounds. This was no longer his domain. When the truck was loaded, I did a final walkthrough of my empty room. The bare walls, the faint indentations in the carpet where my bed and desk used to be, the naked windows, it didn't look sad. It looked clean. It was a blank page. I walked downstairs, my car keys in my hand, my purse over my shoulder. It was the only luggage I had left. My father and Jessica were standing in the entryway, a small, pathetic receiving line to mark my official exit. "Chloe," my father started, his voice a dry rasp. Your mother would have been—" He couldn't finish the sentence. It was a last, desperate attempt at emotional blackmail, and it glanced off me without leaving a mark. "Goodbye," I said, the word clear and final. I didn't say I would call. I didn't say I would visit. I didn't say I would miss them. I opened the front door, stepped out into the bright morning sun, and closed it gently behind me. Not with a slam, but with the quiet, satisfying click of a lock falling into place. As I drove away, I didn't look back in the rearview mirror once. 3 months later, I was standing in the living room of my new apartment in Seattle's Capitol Hill neighborhood, watching the city lights glitter to life as dusk settled over Puget Sound. The apartment was beautiful, with floor-to-ceiling windows, polished concrete floors, and a sleek modern kitchen. It was a space I had chosen, furnished, and paid for myself. Every piece of furniture, from the comfortable velvet sofa to the solid oak dining table, was a testament to my new reality. My life had been completely rebuilt from the ground up, on my own terms. My new role as director was challenging and exhilarating. I spent my days in a state of deep, focused engagement, building my team, designing new analytical frameworks, and earning the respect of my colleagues, not through obligation, but through sheer competence. I was thriving. I had found a yoga studio I liked, discovered a favorite coffee shop, and was slowly building a network of friends based on shared interests and mutual respect, not shared blood and a history of transactions. I was in the middle of unpacking a box of new dishes when my phone buzzed on the granite countertop. I glanced at the caller ID, and a jolt of the old familiar dread went through me, a phantom limb of a life I had already amputated. It was my father. I hesitated for a moment, then took a deep breath and answered, my voice a calm, even, "Hello." The voice on the other end was almost unrecognizable. The booming, authoritative baritone I had known my whole life was gone, replaced by a thin, reedy tone that was laced with a desperate, unfamiliar meekness. "Chloe? It's Dad." He sounded like a supplicant, a telemarketer who knew he was about to be hung up on. "I'm sorry to bother you. I know you're busy." I didn't say anything, just let the silence stretch, forcing him to get to the point. Things are, well, things are a little tight here," he said, his voice cracking slightly. "The interest rate on the mortgage adjusted, you know how it is, and well, with just my income, we're falling a bit behind. I was just wondering if you could, you know, help us out. Just for a few months, just until we get back on our feet." The request was so audacious, so completely tone-deaf to the finality of our last conversation, that I almost laughed. He had learned nothing. He still saw me as a resource, a solution to his financial problems. The only thing that had changed was his method. The threats and emotional blackmail were gone, replaced by a pathetic, wheedling plea. It was the last gasp of a failed regime, a beggar rattling a cup at the gates of a palace he had once owned. He was testing the boundary I had drawn, hoping that 3 months and 1,000 miles had softened my resolve. He was about to find out how wrong he was. I held the phone to my ear and listened, my back straight, my eyes fixed on the darkening Seattle skyline. I let him speak without interruption, affording him a level of patience and courtesy he had never once given me. I listened to the whole pathetic, meandering story, the unexpected bill, the shortfall, the fear in his voice that was, for the first time, entirely genuine. He wasn't performing. He was desperate. He was speaking to me now as he should have spoken to me then, as someone whose help he needed, as someone with power. When he finally finished his stammering request, the silence that followed was my own. It was not a hesitation, it was a choice. I was allowing the full weight of his words to land and dissipate, ensuring my response was not a reaction to his panic, but a statement of my own unshakable truth. "I understand you're in a difficult position," I said finally, my voice perfectly level, calm, and devoid of any emotion. It was the voice I used in a board meeting to deliver an unflattering but necessary data point. However, the answer is no. The word hung in the air between us, a solid, immovable object. There was a sharp intake of breath on his end, then a sputtering disbelief. No? What do you mean, no? Chloe, this is your family. This is the house you grew up in. His voice was beginning to climb back toward its old register of indignant authority, but it was a hollow echo, a bluff with no cards to back it up. My decision is not negotiable, I stated, cutting him off before he could gather any momentum. Our last conversation was very clear. The $18,000 was the end of my financial contributions. I meant what I said. I will not be sending any money. I could hear his choked, ragged breathing, the sound of a man drowning in the consequences of his own actions. There was nothing left to say, no argument he could make that had any purchase. The power dynamic had been permanently and irrevocably inverted. I felt no triumph, no surge of vengeful satisfaction. I just felt quiet. I do wish you and Jessica the best, I said, and the sincerity in my voice surprised even me. It was the detached, impersonal goodwill one feels for a former acquaintance. I truly hope you figure things out. Before he could respond, before he could plead or rage or bargain, I added a final, gentle, "Goodbye, Dad." Then I ended the call. I placed the phone back on the counter and looked out the window. The city was a brilliant tapestry of light against the deep indigo of the night. A fairy, a tiny jewel of light itself, glided silently across the dark water of the Sound. The suffocating weight that had rested on my chest for my entire life was gone. It hadn't been lifted in a single explosive moment, but had evaporated slowly over the past 3 months, with every box I unpacked, every new street I explored, every project I successfully led at work. My father's call was just the final confirmation that it was gone for good. A profound sense of peace settled over me, deep and quiet and sure. It was a peace that had been earned, paid for in full. My worth was no longer a subject for debate, a commodity to be negotiated or a resource to be plundered. It was a fact, as solid and real as the floor beneath my feet, and as bright as the city lights spread out before me. And the future, for the first time, was entirely my own.